It was a sunny day, just like every other day in the big city. But this morning was anything but ordinary for our main character. Recently, sandstorms had rolled through, leaving the sky shrouded in dark smog. The government advised people to stay home and not leave their houses. On top of that, there had been an earthquake, but it wasn't too strong, so there were no casualties or injuries. However, the tremors gradually intensified, and the new shakes were far more dangerous than the previous ones. No one could understand what was really happening. Panic set in as they witnessed the ground in the middle of the street start to crack. Suddenly, a massive tower erupted from the earth. Debris flew everywhere, destroying the buildings around it. It was terrifying and loud. No one knew what was going on. Buildings began to shake and collapse. The main character tried to shield a little girl with his own body and called for help for the injured. The girl couldn't comprehend what was happening and was terrified. The entire neighborhood was devastated. Windows shattered in the buildings. The same chaos was unfolding all over the world. Strange towers began to appear in many countries across the globe. People started calling these bizarre structures towers of fear and couldn't explain their sudden emergence. Many received notifications, inviting them to a game and asking them to choose a role. Most agreed and made their choices, but they had no idea what awaited them or what trials they would face. Suddenly, all participants were sent to the battlefield. All items and skills could be earned as rewards for completing tasks. However, it quickly became clear that this was not a game but a true survival test, because soon enough the tower would reveal itself, and everyone would learn what dangers it concealed. From the outside, it was gigantic and ominous. Builders tried to figure out who was behind it, but the construction technology was baffling. It seemed like it was made by extraterrestrial life. Suddenly, they spotted the first living being that resembled a human. They called the police and tried to understand who this mysterious figure was, but it quickly became clear that it was a monster, terrifying and powerful. Suddenly, horrifying monsters began to emerge from the tower, and they were aggressive. It was a catastrophe. Monsters were spilling out of the tower and spreading chaos across the world. Panic erupted globally, leading to a series of attacks that claimed many lives. Very quickly, in the countries where the towers appeared, martial law was declared. The army tried to stop the horrific mutants, but all efforts were in vain. The monsters were incredibly strong. There were so many that even heavy weaponry couldn't stop them. Because of the monsters that emerged from the tower, the worst had happened. A third of the Earth's population was wiped out, and those trapped inside could only watch the devastation unfold. Their role was to try to survive all the trials and save the planet. But few understood what they were really supposed to do. However, the system indicated that they needed to clear all levels of the Tower of Monsters. The strong and brave individuals who became participants in the trial became humanity's last hope for survival. People were assigned the role of walkers and began their assault on the tower. They needed to defeat the mutants and try to prevent the end of the world. Ahead lay many trials and obstacles that hindered their progress to the next level. Among them were massive boulders that appeared when transitioning to a new level. Strength alone wouldn't help, as the boulders were not easy to destroy or crush. Moreover, after destroying the boulders, there was a chance to obtain valuable ore. The stones sparkled and seemed incredibly precious. The system indicated that this was a return stone, allowing one to go back in time. Captain Walker Inchan Huang was ready to use it, but after he activated the stone, a bright light flooded the entire room. It was so bright that the others couldn't look at it without nearly going blind. And when the light faded, they realized Inchan Huang had vanished. The stone was indeed magical, as the man had traveled back in time. But how would he return to them? And how long would he be in the past? Sakamoto had been a scientist in the past, and the secret of the magical treasure seemed much clearer to him than to others. He believed that the man had gone back in time, and through the time-space continuum, he would no longer be able to return to them. He managed to explain what had happened based on the theory of the multiverse and parallel worlds. According to him, a rift in the universe had just occurred, which meant that Inchan Huang, who had gone to the past, could never again be the man everyone knew. No one understood him, but the scientist was confident in his words. One thing he knew for sure: Inchan Huang had entered another time-space, so his journey to the past wouldn't change the present. Moreover, the items from the tower never lied. Sakamoto didn't know if everyone who used the stone ended up in the same world. But ultimately, the stone's effects went beyond human understanding. After a while, a new shockwave hit, which was a true jolt. The sky turned a bloody color. A new wave of monsters was gathering to leave the tower once again. They were set on destroying all the remaining humans on Earth. The walkers tried to stop this, They needed to find a way to prevent the apocalypse. But would they dare activate the sacred return stone to go back in time? Or would they stay in the tower and continue fighting? The choice wasn't easy, as many warriors were dying in battle. The mutants weren't weak. They overpowered even a dozen of the best warriors. Moreover, the monsters were gigantic, and it took a tremendous effort to stop them. Now, with almost the entire army dead, the walkers had no choice left. In this world, their lives were at an end. Hope for victory had vanished. The entire army of walkers was destroyed. They had lost. The remaining soldiers were injured and weak, unable to continue fighting. Many of them wanted to surrender and end their trial. But not him. The hero was determined to fight until the very end. No matter what, he would keep fighting and killing mutants. On his own, he managed to take down some of the strongest monsters that stood in his way. He protected his comrades. Moreover, the warriors saved many of them, and now they owed him their lives. Additionally, many people had fled the battlefield in the first moments. Only those who had nothing left to lose and who weren't afraid of death remained. The only hope was the return stone. But there were those who weren't planning to use it and leave the tower. Their survival and that of the world depended on them. They were the saviors of the world, fighting for the fate of all living things on the planet. Many brave warriors had perished in this war. All who remained were exhausted. They needed rest and sleep, but there was no opportunity to recover. They had miscalculated their strength, and in one moment, everything went wrong. The attacks didn't stop, and new mutants were constantly gathering to attack them. This time, it was one of their strongest enemies they had ever faced. The boy charged straight at the monster that was attacking people. He was aided by Jianwan, who was preparing to attack it from behind. He was supposed to strike the mutant from the other side while the man distracted it. He waited for the perfect moment to strike, and when the opportunity arose, he did everything he could. The powerful enemy was defeated. Jianwan severed its head, but the enemy had caused a lot of damage to all the soldiers. Fortunately, there were no casualties, and everyone remained alive. The injured would be able to recover after a long rest, so they had a chance to reach the top floor. All the soldiers were grateful to them for managing to defeat it on their own. They greeted the strong men who risked their lives for them. However, a sword remained on the ground, belonging to the mutant. It was a dragon suppression sword, which had very powerful characteristics, as it was forged with the energy of the sun. Yunwan believed that with the new weapon, they had every chance to pass all the trials. The main character thought they were lucky, but quickly realized that was far from the truth. On the 98th floor, they encountered a true purgatory monster. It was a real demon, very dangerous and powerful. It managed to melt the walkers' weapons and all their armor. Many soldiers died trying to defeat it. Jianwan couldn't believe this was the end for him and his brave army. Just then, he took a heavy hit. As a result, he was thrown back several meters and crashed painfully against the wall. He was seriously injured and bleeding began. At that moment, he thought about surrendering as he saw no point in continuing to fight. Everything they had gone through, the sacrifice they had to make for victory. Was it all in vain, and now death awaited them all? Now all living things on Earth stood on the brink of death. He couldn't just die and give up right now. However, hope was gone, and he wasn't expecting a miracle. The monster was closing in, ready to finish the hero off. Suddenly, Yunhuan, who appeared out of nowhere, managed to change everything. He turned the tide of battle by delivering a serious blow. He fought the demon, but he needed support. At that moment, the hero needed to gather his strength and help him, because on his own, he wouldn't be able to handle it and win. The demon wasn't easy to kill, so he had to retreat to avoid serious injury. Yunhuan tried to defeat it, but he couldn't manage it alone. He needed support, and just as he was about to attack the monster, it noticed him. Now, what the main character feared the most happened. His loyal friend could no longer fight. Blood appeared on his back. The demon pierced him and mortally wounded him. Jianwan realized it was too late, and he couldn't change anything anymore. Now the demon was also going to kill him. The mutant turned and began moving in his direction. Its eyes burned. The monster was furious and wanted to kill. Now he couldn't simply accept the death of his friend. He needed to fight and do everything possible to try to win. So he took that step and promised himself he would fight. Jianwan exerted incredible effort to get back on his feet. He managed to grab his sword and prepared for the worst. Now he was face to face with the enemy who had killed all his friends. Jianwan understood that now, the survival of all humanity and victory during the apocalypse depended solely on him. This was his last chance, and the boy was ready to accept his death if that was his fate. Suddenly, he saw a strange light that caught his attention. After that, there was an explosion, but he didn't stop, no matter what. He began to close in on his target, just a few steps away from the demon. This was the final blow into which he poured all the strength he had left. After the battle, there was a lot of blood on the walls. The demon was defeated, its remains lying on the ground. It no longer breathed, and hot lava flowed from its body. Genwan tried to find his friend so he could take him with him. The boy hoped that Yunhwan was still alive and that he had a chance to save him. Yunhwan sat on the ground, clutching a wound that hurt and bled profusely. In his hand he held a sacred stone, and as long as he was alive, he had a chance to travel back in time and escape death. Genwan couldn't believe that his friend had dared to do this and remained alive after such a terrible injury. But he knew that only cowards did that. He felt he deserved death, but didn't want to face it just yet. It was hard for him because during their time in the tower, they had become true friends. Yunhwan had always been kind and smiled. He tried to help everyone and supported anyone in need. The walkers even started calling him the Knight of Smiles. And this was the first time he had stopped smiling. He left the main character alone, so he couldn't see him. People who used the sacred stone to save themselves were called traitors. And even in such a dire moment, they had no right to use it. So the boy simply left it behind and walked away. Yunhwan remained sitting in the same spot. Suddenly a smile returned to his face. The stone he held was damaged, having suffered greatly. Therefore, he simply couldn't use it to teleport himself back in time. He managed to get to his feet. He began to walk, ascending to a new floor in the tower. He held on to his wound and realized that his friend was much stronger than he had thought from the very beginning. Yunhwan never imagined he would make it to the highest floor. Despite being doomed, the boy was thrilled at the opportunity. For him, it was an honor, and he was glad to have someone like Genwan by his side. Now, with a calm heart, he jumped down. Meanwhile, Genwan was trying to open the main gates, but they wouldn't budge. Genwan didn't know what lay beyond them, and that frightened him. He recalled the journey he had to take to get here. He was the only one who had survived to this moment. The boy didn't want to stop, so he planned to keep going. When he finally managed to open the gates, a bright light appeared, blinding him. It seemed like a portal to a new and unknown world. Genwan simply couldn't believe his eyes. He had never seen anything like it in his life. Right in front of him was a snowy plain. There was a lot of snow, and it was incredibly cold. Everything had turned into solid ice. There wasn't a living soul around, and the hero couldn't understand where he had ended up. However, danger loomed. Some unknown force wanted to destroy him. Sharp ice tried to kill him, so the boy started to run. He managed to dodge one of those strikes. But then a new danger appeared before him, far more terrifying than the sharp ice. It was a gigantic ice dragon, hunting him and wanting to kill him. With its breath, Genwan's body began to freeze, but that didn't scare him at all. Another attack. The dragon tried to hit him with its icy breath. He had to run and hide. Luckily, there was a cave on the hero's path where he could take cover. The dragon tried to find him but saw nothing. Genwan stayed silent. He knew that if he made even a single sound, he would die immediately. He had to hide for a long time, and to keep from freezing, he tried to warm himself. This was his 99th level, which couldn't compare in difficulty to all the others. And the dragon was the boss of this level, much stronger than the demon in the tower. If it weren't for the weapons and gear left behind by his fallen friends, he would have died long ago. He had a cool sword and armor that could withstand extreme cold and kept him warm. Additionally, he had another very valuable item. The bracelet on his wrist was obtained after defeating the demon. Genwan understood that time was running out, and he needed to try to fight the boss. Suddenly, he saw the ghost of a girl. Genwan begged her for forgiveness. After all, he couldn't defeat the dragon because he lacked the strength to do so. He recalled the previous levels and the trials he had to endure. Back then, he also thought it was all over and wanted to give up. A voice pulled him from his thoughts. He remembered it was his acquaintance, the blacksmith. He spoke to him, but saw that Genwan wasn't listening and was lost in thought. Genwan wanted to try to defeat the boss again, as he had been only at the 50th level then. Blacksmith Jay believed that he had enough strength to do it. Now they were in a settlement that they had managed to reclaim him after defeating the mutants on other levels. Every day, fierce battles raged, and many walkers died, but they never stopped believing and fighting. The priest organized a special rescue unit. The forge was always bustling with work, and the best craftsmen tried to make equipment for the people defending the entire world. But now, with so many people dead, only Jay remained. He was the last master in the whole city, so the man had to work day and night, and on top of that, there was a shortage of materials. Just a few months ago, there had been enough supplies to equip an entire army. At this rate, soon there would be no people left in the village. The main character didn't know how much time had passed since the tower first appeared on Earth. But since that moment, people had stopped fighting, and no one battled the mutants except for them. He thought humanity had been wiped out, as he didn't know what was really happening outside the tower. Jay also thought about this, but he didn't rush to conclusions. When the hero explored the tower, he noticed a very strange pattern. He had never even thought about it before, but the return stone he found on the lower levels was very peculiar. Moreover, there were strange notes on the walls left by unknown creators. It could have been a message, but he couldn't understand anything and didn't consider it anything special. However, 2 days ago, a grandmother he knew very well disappeared. In the tower, time didn't flow like in the normal world. If someone vanished, there could be only 2 reasons. Either they traveled back in time, or they simply jumped off the tower. Just like what his friend did when he was dying and bleeding out. The grandmother who disappeared and blacksmith Jay were among the few who remained alive. Yet these thoughts wouldn't leave the blacksmith alone. He tried to make the best and strongest weapons to withstand any enemy's blows. Genwan wanted the man to teach him his craft. He considered this work noble and very responsible. Besides, if the blacksmith died, no one would be able to create armor and weapons. So he began his training that very day. Now he needed to come up with a new plan. No living person had managed to get as far as he had. The dragon admitted that the main character was indeed an amazing person and had underestimated him from the very start. The last thing the boy wanted was for his skill to be acknowledged by the dragon himself. The dragon expressed his condolences, saying that after the hero's death, he would be very sad. But Genwan didn't even think about giving up so easily. He had nothing to lose, so he decided to at least try to defeat him. The dragon had very strong armor made of ice, but Genwan had long noticed that deep cracks had formed even on it. The monster prepared to attack and wanted to try to freeze him with its icy breath. It was going to end his suffering and take the boy's life. Genwan stepped forward, right toward the dragon. The battle began, and bright flashes of light could be seen for miles. Due to the powerful explosions, small earthquakes began. As a result of the battle, Genwan was severely injured, but he remained alive. But he didn't want to give up, so the dragon decided he would fight to the very end. Even if the boy held on, eventually he fell, and the dragon was convinced that victory was near. The main character heard the voices of his fallen friends. They all wanted him to gather his strength and finally defeat the enemy. He had a very serious injury. Blood was pouring from his mouth. His head was battered. Yet, he managed to gather himself and strike back. Genwan freed himself from the icy prison and lunged at his enemy. The monster wanted to force him to surrender, as it didn't believe he could defeat it on his own. Genwan had come to the tower last. So many skills and abilities were unknown to him. So he decided to forego magic and develop only his raw physical strength. He wanted to fight with swords and become a true warrior. He had to train hard to catch up with his friends, but still he became the strongest among them. Every day he felt himself growing much stronger, but every day he trained much harder, and that made him who he was. As a result, he managed to gain such incredible strength that he became much stronger than the other mages around him. Despite this, fighting against a powerful boss at such a high level was very difficult. He landed a huge number of hits, but only a small scratch appeared on the mutant's body. Despite its small size, the dragon remained very fast and agile. It continued to strike at his weak spot, and suddenly he saw a light emanating from its body. It felt very familiar to him. After all, he had seen a similar light when he defeated a mutant on a lower level. And if this was what he thought it was, he had a chance at victory. So Genwan gathered his strength and began to attack again. As a result of the strike, an explosion occurred, releasing a massive amount of energy. Genwan nearly fell to his knees from the powerful shockwave that formed. The dragon couldn't believe he had so much strength, and he continued to fight. Now the mutant was seriously injured, having lost an eye. But that wasn't enough because the main character wanted to behead him. He couldn't relax and needed to land a huge number of hits again. However, this time the dragon was furious. It prepared to destroy him with a single blow. He opened his mouth to launch an attack. It was a powerful strike from the air, and he barely managed to dodge it at the last second. His clothes were ruined, and he realized that his chances of winning were almost non-existent. The dragon was convinced of its invincibility, believing that even an entire army of creatures like it couldn't defeat him. And the people weren't fooled by the Dreamstone. Everything would have been completely different. But Jianwan didn't understand what that meant, as he had never heard of the Dreamstone before. He had to run. The dragon had completely lost its sight, so this was his only chance to escape before it started smashing everything in its path. Genwan managed to return to the lower level where it was safe, but he didn't want to give up. He planned to regain his strength and try again next time. Genwan was a hair's breadth from death. If the dragon's claws had reached him, he would have inevitably perished. The dragon's words about the Dreamstone wouldn't leave his mind. Genwan couldn't grasp what it all meant or how the demons had managed to deceive the people. He desperately wanted to find the stone the demon had mentioned. 5 years had passed since their brutal battle. During that time, the protagonist trained and prepared for the confrontation, acquiring a wealth of skills and abilities. He defeated the dragon and gained much more for his victory. Notifications from the system came pouring in one after another. It even started to annoy him, as it was incredibly irritating. Soon he would learn what the Dragonstone was, the very thing he had been trying to find for so long. The system promised that soon he would understand everything and receive his reward. Ahead lay the final challenge, level 100. Additionally, he managed to acquire a weapon that was unlike any ordinary sword. He examined it closely, trying to figure out how to wield it. However, he noticed something very strange on the ground. It was an incomprehensible mixture of black, formed at the spot where the dead boss had fallen. Very soon he saw a number that indicated the next level. Those were the doors that would lead him to a new stage of the challenge. So without hesitation, he set off on a new journey. After he entered, the mysterious doors vanished. Genwan found himself in a control room. He was in a new unfamiliar place. It was underwater. Next, he entered a special chamber filled with numerous monitors. From there, he learned that he was being constantly watched. He also saw what the tower looked like now. It displayed all the places and levels he had passed with his friends. Suddenly, he heard a voice welcoming him to his arrival. The mysterious stranger hadn't expected to see anyone so high up, as he was the first to achieve this. His appearance startled the protagonist, but the stranger tried to calm him down. The observation room was a nice place, but the guy couldn't figure out how to use the cameras and devices. He received a notification that he was the first to make it this far and still be alive. Now he was being watched by the very monarchs of the great land. Moreover, he was the first to complete the training. At that moment, he found himself in the middle of a lake, surrounded by countless others who had also tried to do this. He began to sink underwater and couldn't believe that everything was happening for real. Because underwater there was air, and he could breathe freely. This shocked him greatly. Suddenly, a stranger appeared before him, someone he had never seen before. It was a black ghost with a lion's head. He tried to invade his mind and alter his thoughts. The ghost praised the boy for the incredible result he had achieved, even though he was human. Suddenly, a real storm began, and Jaenwan found himself at its epicenter. But it didn't harm him. He didn't even get wet. The ghost noticed that Jaenwan was serious and quickly regained his composure. Moreover, Jaenwan didn't respect him and openly started insulting him. Besides, he wanted the ghost to finally introduce himself and tell him his name. It was the devil, the master of the tower who controlled all the monsters. The hero realized that if this was just training, then the real game hadn't even begun. The demon smiled as he had guessed, but first he wanted to show him something. He snapped his fingers, and before the protagonist appeared something he had never seen with his own eyes. They found themselves surrounded by a massive array of monitors, and it was hard to believe that everything was real. He had a ton of questions and couldn't understand what was actually happening. He watched as he and his friends passed each level. At that moment, they looked very happy, completely unaware of what awaited them ahead. The protagonist saw the moment he first joined the others in the tower, and how he began to get to know them and learn. He also saw how they died one by one. He would never see their faces again. Suddenly, he heard an incomprehensible voice calling out to him by name. The demon was sure that the boy never expected to find himself in such a situation. Genwan saw again how his loved ones died. Among them was a girl he had loved with all his heart, and her death was incredibly hard to bear. There was also his best friend, who was asking for his forgiveness. Now he recalled all the pain, tears, and disappointment he had to endure. The demon understood that these emotions were typical for a human and was prepared to give him a second chance. Now he wanted the protagonist to replay the game and save all his friends' lives. The demon thought this was a good opportunity to fix everything. In the world of humans, it was impossible. So if he agreed, he could bring everyone back. Now he would know what awaited him ahead. Genwan couldn't believe this wasn't the end. Would he really have to go through everything from the beginning again? But he had to save the world after reaching the top of the tower. Now he understood that he had been cruelly deceived all along. And all this time, humanity had no chance of salvation. They could only do one thing. People constantly tried to seize the tower, dying in massive numbers. The salvation of all humanity was merely a phantom hope. And in reality, it was a cruel lie. He wasn't going to explain anything to the demon. He already knew that everything was known. He wasn't going back to the past. At his words, the demon began to laugh. The laughter was so loud it echoed throughout the room. He tried to bite the protagonist and wanted to scare him, but the boy didn't react. He stood still, remaining very calm. The demon couldn't believe that he had chosen to stay and was going to explain it to him again. So, in reality, there was no object or phenomenon that could send him back in time. This meant that the sacred stone of return was just a lie and had never existed. When the hero realized this, he couldn't believe that so many people had simply perished. Now he recalled the words of the ice dragon, who had told him the same thing. Because if they hadn't all died, the world would be completely different now, and many of them could still be alive. It was the stone from his couch, which, with its power, took the souls of innocent people trying to save themselves. A person's soul was forever trapped in demonic dreams and could never escape. The demon couldn't even imagine that there were people willing to believe in these tales and dare to use the stone and kill themselves. He considered it true obsession. For a long time, Genwan was silent, and only after a while could he come to his senses. For him, it was a real shock. Now he needed to make a choice and start the real game. This wasn't a return to the past, so he needed to make a choice. But he chose a different answer, not the one the demon expected. Now the demon was surprised. He couldn't understand his decision. In fact, Genwan understood everything and knew that even now they were trying to deceive him. The system itself hinted at this, moving participants into the demon's dreams. Genwan had already been in his dreams, and now he was going to make a completely different decision. At that moment, the protagonist became very resolute and was ready to take risks. He was going to kill the demon, even at the cost of his own life. Only after that would he try to help others and save the universe. However, the demon insisted that there was nothing beyond this point. It was the end of the tower. But Jianwan no longer trusted anyone and knew only one thing. He had to fight and defeat the demon at any cost. The demon wouldn't let him go easily. Moreover, he wasn't just any opponent. He could turn his own body into smoke. At any moment, he could dissolve away, become a true phantom, which was his greatest hidden talent. However, Genwan wasn't afraid. The demon's words didn't scare him. Even such impressive abilities didn't evoke any emotion on his face, especially fear. Genwan already understood that he had been trapped in the demon's dreams all along and couldn't escape. Furthermore, he insisted that no monsters actually existed and showed him footage of real life where there were happy people. Seeing this, the protagonist was confused, as he couldn't understand what was really happening. He found himself in the midst of a crowd of people who didn't notice him at all. The boy heard human voices and laughter, and it seemed he finally managed to understand everything. No one was dying, all the people were alive, and in reality, there was no catastrophe at all. His friends and family, for whom he had fought for many years, were alive. Now the demon was going to show him the most important thing. He transported him to a hospital where there were a huge number of patients connected to special devices. They were all asleep, and doctors monitored them around the clock. Also, among the vast number of people he recognized, he saw himself. Decades had passed in the tower, but in the human world, it had been no more than a month. The demon was convinced that no living person could ever defeat him. After all, he had barely managed to pass the trials, and even that took him many years. When the hero realized that all his friends were actually alive, he exhaled in relief. He also understood that it was actually a dragon, not a demon, and he had fought them before and knew how to defeat them. The demon began to attack him. The boy tried to defend himself. He didn't believe a word he said, so he prepared for a tough battle and wanted to strike first. But this time he couldn't win because he wasn't ready for the duel. He barely managed to escape, so he moved to the city where their forge was. However, the master was nowhere to be found. The boy was left alone. He had no other choice, so he began to work hard. First of all, he needed to make good equipment for himself and a powerful weapon. 72 days passed. Every day he tried to fight the demon, but he couldn't leave even a scratch on his body. On the other hand, he was glad to be alive and not dead. The protagonist didn't understand why the monster didn't kill him, but he didn't care how many days it took as long as he could kill it. Every time the demon mocked him and ridiculed him. In reality, the demon was trying to keep him close because he understood. The protagonist was a product he could sell. He had never seen anything like it before and couldn't believe that a person could want to live so desperately. All the qualities of the main character matched exactly what he needed. During his training, they selected the best, and he was the only one who made it all the way to the end. The hardest part was transitioning to the new stage of training. It was a phase where a person was capable of killing others, but the souls of those who died in the tower remained alive forever. The demon was terrified of accidentally harming the main character and corrupting his soul. And the souls of the dead annoyed the demon greatly, never letting him rest. So he understood that he needed to grow the main character as quickly as possible, prepare him, and sell the boy's soul. After all, he had to pay off his debt for using the tower. The demon considered him a highly talented product, so much so that even gods unrelated to the events got involved with him. He tried to negotiate with the hero. But the hero didn't even want to listen and tried to fight him every single day. The demon wanted to force him to start the real game. The boy didn't even hear him. Genwan didn't believe a word from this deceitful creature. So at one moment, the demon lost his patience. For a few minutes, he simply vanished, right in the heat of their battle. Then he showed what he was truly capable of. Genwan knew the demon was right behind him, so he prepared for a new attack. But it seemed like it was too late. At that moment, everything could have changed. Genwan nearly died. He took a terrible hit and was wounded. The demon didn't understand what he wanted and why he was trying so hard. He was ready to give him all his skills and power just to make him surrender his own soul. But Genwan still listened to him. Even in a situation where his life hung by a thread, he didn't want to give up. Now the demon was asking him to join him, and Genwan realized that this was his small victory. So they tried to negotiate. The boy had one condition that the demon had to fulfill. But it wasn't so easy to fool the main character. He knew everything because spending so many years in the tower had taught him well. According to the demon, there were many dimensions, and the main one in the entire universe was Earth. Earth, a small planet in the solar system, had many alternatives, similar planets where life also existed. The tower was meant for people to train and level up, and those who made it to the very end would have the chance to enter other dimensions. And demons like him could control the game and decide the fates of people. But Genwan didn't understand why the demon needed this. However, the demon didn't answer. He didn't know the answer to that question, so he decided to show him. Why out of all the other worlds did the tower end up only on Earth? Why he and his family were forced to take responsibility and fight in the tower. In reality, their world was chosen by chance. But that wasn't at all what Genwan wanted to know. He stopped him because the question sounded entirely different. He wanted to know why the demon was in charge of the Tower of Nightmares. That question made him nervous, because it was his hobby. The demon enjoyed watching people suffer, their deaths, blood, and agony. It seemed Genwan didn't believe a word he said. Among demons, there were those who didn't participate in the game, but simply observed what was happening. The monster wanted the main character to just believe him and agree to start the game. But Genwan just silently stared at him. Now Genwan found himself in an icy world. After the battle, he needed to recover, and this place was the safest. Along with that, he read about new achievements and tried to figure out the system. He managed to acquire all the skills and abilities available, but despite that, he couldn't defeat him. Every time he faced defeat and nearly died. He even resigned himself to the fact that defeating him was impossible, and now all of humanity was truly destroyed. He thought about the new world he might end up in if he agreed to the demon's terms. But suddenly, he felt a sharp pain. He had a vision, after which he felt a very strange and incomprehensible sensation. He saw the icy world around him starting to change. The ice began to melt, and there was a yellow dust in the air. It seemed like an ordinary hallucination due to severe exhaustion. But in reality, everything was just as it seemed. There were many tiny particles in the air. They flew around him, could take shape, and transform into entirely different objects. These particles were part of and composed the world, and their shape didn't matter at all. To learn everything, he returned to the demon once more. He was curious about who was the main one responsible for what had happened. The monarchs were the rulers of vast lands, and those who failed to complete the game were directed there and received their support. But what did their support entail? Was it limitless power or skills? A person's future changed depending on the monarch they chose. And the demon swore he would use all his power to help Genwan reach the great monarch who would assist him. But only if Genwan agreed to go all the way to the end. It seemed he was trying to bargain with him. So, Genwan had no choice and agreed to do everything as the demon asked. In 10 days, he promised to start his new game. All the days he had left, he spent preparing for the trial. And the demon simply watched how hard he was trying. However, he understood that soon it would all come to an end, so he needed to wait a little longer. But he knew that now Genwan was doubting because of the lies. He was angry at the masters who had made him a warden in the tower and bought it. But if that were the case, the people inside could voluntarily complete their trials. And now, the demon simply couldn't leave the tower until at least one person completed the trial to the very end. Still, he had no other choice but to wait. Tomorrow would be a special day because everything would end and he would finally be free. The next day, Jianwan came to him and found himself faced with a choice: to start the game and finish the trial. He remembered everything the demon had told him. Now he needed to accept the offer and continue his fight. The demon was very excited because he had waited so long for this day and wanted everything to finally end. But suddenly, something unexpected happened. The main character struck. The demon couldn't believe his eyes. The boy dared to trick him. Now he had a serious injury in his body. Genwan couldn't believe he had managed to deceive him so easily. Now everything had changed. He still wanted to kill him, despite the uneven powers. Genwan was about to start his hunt from the very beginning. After the hallucinations, it became very hard for him to control his own sword. Every time he tried to strike, it was incredibly difficult to control his own blade. He felt very strange, as if he were waking up after a long sleep. Suddenly, he saw a very bright flash. A bright light began to emanate from the demon's body. Now he felt alive and seemed to finally be able to smile after so many years. But it wasn't as easy as he thought. Just at that moment, he found himself many floors below. The demon remained alive. He had never seen anyone like the main character. This could have happened a long time ago if the boy had died at the very beginning. Everything would have been much simpler. Now he had captured him with ironwood and was going to force him to finish the game by force. The monster realized he had no chance of defeating the main character. Now there was only one thing left: to force him. In reality, your nightmares automatically closed 100 days after completing the training. The demon needed the main character to stay alive and agree to participate in the game. But even after these words, he didn't stop trying to free himself. And just at that moment, he was about to strike. The demon had lived for many years and had been to different worlds. But why was he now trying to subdue ordinary people? Also, when he realized that the monster wanted to hand him over to the Black Monarch of Mathematics. Hearing this, the monster got angry. He couldn't believe the main character had figured out all his plans. Because it was Genwan who was the gift, the only chance for the demon to leave the tower, which he wanted most. A very strong pain began, and finally he managed to free himself completely. The main character gathered himself and lunged at his enemy. He began to deliver a huge number of strikes, and the demon seemed completely unprepared for it. He was in pain and didn't have time to defend himself or block the hit. For the first time in many days, he finally managed to wound his opponent. And the enemy simply couldn't believe it. Now he wasn't invulnerable like before. It was just impossible, as no one had ever been able to hurt him before. The main character had a special weapon that he had obtained from the trials. Thanks to it, he finally had a chance to kill the demon. For the first time during his time in the tower, he was so close to completing his trial and saving humanity. From the very beginning, he felt that something was off. Because as soon as Jianwan reached the 100th floor, doubts began to creep in. And why did the demon let him survive every time and not kill him? Every time he returned, regained his strength, and started all over again. Maybe he just resurrected every time he died? Because he saw strange particles of the world in text. After long doubts, he finally reached a stage of absolute confidence. Now he understood everything, and he remembered his true calling. At all costs, he had to kill the demon and do everything possible to achieve that. And now he was succeeding. He managed to scare him and wound him. Moreover, he lifted the time limits, and a new message appeared in the system. The demon was no longer going to show him mercy. He offered the man to surrender while it wasn't too late. But Genwan didn't even think about doing that. The demon began to press harder and seriously wounded him. A lot of blood appeared. He couldn't believe that Jianwan, who was an ordinary person, was capable of defeating him. Now, when the boy was seriously injured, he began to ponder. Was this really his end? The countdown began. The demon had only a few seconds left to kill. The main character understood that in a few seconds, it would all be over, and he needed to hold on until then. Because now, when time passed, the real game would begin, in which he would have to participate. And with his actions, he was only making things worse. When suddenly, time ran out. Their battle ended. He was lucky to stay alive and hold on for a few more seconds. Suddenly, another flash. As bright as in previous times on the lower levels. Was it really over now, and had he failed to win? Suddenly, the demon began to scream. He realized that this was no simple reboot. In fact, the main character had managed to achieve much more. The tower began to crumble, and everything around him exploded. And the strength within him started to fade. Now the demon could no longer remain as strong as before. Because his tower was falling apart, the main character turned to him, wanting the monster to listen closely. Humans were complicated beings, souls that could be sold and manipulated. No creature had the right to control them or force them through such harsh trials. The main character was done listening and following the demon's wishes. Now he was simply going to destroy him and move forward on his own path, facing new challenges. His goal was to stop the apocalypse and save the human world. He also didn't want to destroy the world that the mutants had created to prevent such a catastrophe from ever happening again. But now it was all over, and even the demon was begging the main character to reconsider and not kill him. After all, there was simply nothing above the 100th level in the tower. Yet even now, the demon was trying to lie, and the main character didn't believe him. The monster tried to convince the guy that he had been sent to the tower for a reason. Moreover, on each floor, the main character saw inscriptions. They piqued his interest greatly, so he spent all his free time trying to decipher their secrets. Were these markings left by ordinary people trying to pass the trials, or had the demon himself written them? Genwan knew they were currently at the root of the Tree of Illusions, and if he broke through the tower's roof, he would likely be able to go further and only move upward. Genwan gathered all his strength and tried to strike. Immediately, he saw a new notification. The training was paused, and he hadn't managed to complete the game. After a bright flash and an explosion, the main character found himself in a new place. As soon as he woke up, he tried to escape the thick underbrush he had landed in. He also saw tracks on the ground and realized there was indeed life on this new planet, and he was not alone. Suddenly, he heard footsteps approaching him. They were horrifying creatures resembling giant dogs. They were hungry, and when they saw him, they were ready to attack and tear him apart. They lunged at him, but Genwan didn't panic. He prepared for battle and calmly got ready to defend himself. He killed one with a single blow. It felt too easy for him. Another dog tried to attack from behind and wanted to surround him. But he was ready for that too, easily dodging its strike. He needed to use a different approach for this creature because it was much stronger than the previous one. So Genwan prepared for a powerful strike. And just like that, he effortlessly killed it. He dared to take on the last mutant completely unarmed. So with his bare hands, he grabbed its claws. The monsters here weren't as strong as they looked. They were just huge. However, that wasn't all, as he heard many other sounds. Suddenly, he saw the locals, the owners of the dogs he had killed. The green mutants wanted to attack him to punish him. Genwan understood little of what they were saying because they spoke their own language, which was unknown to him. He tried to negotiate with them and was ready to retreat in exchange for his freedom, but nothing worked. They simply didn't understand each other, so the mutants charged at him. The first one tried to deliver a strong blow, forcing Genwan to retreat. But this wasn't a retreat. He didn't want to kill them, but the mutants left him no choice. So he decided to fight them. Genwan killed the green mutants one by one, leaving them no chance of survival. He tried to find out where he was from one of them, but he didn't understand a single word. He started inflicting pain on it. But even after that, it didn't respond. The monsters understood that they had to kill the human before them immediately. One mutant tried to bite him and refused to give up. However, even that didn't scare Genwan. These monsters weren't as simple and were actually skilled warriors. And when there were many of them, he could run into trouble. Still, he hadn't managed to learn anything, and all the mutants were dead. He needed to explore the area and find useful items that were on this land. Now he had a bag for his belongings, which would serve as his inventory. After he stepped outside the tower, the system stopped working, and he lost access to the system in this new world. The only thing he had left was the ability to get detailed information about the items he found. He found stones that could enhance his abilities. He collected the most valuable ones, intending to use them in dangerous situations. But there were too many items, so he couldn't carry them all the time. Suddenly, he felt danger again and drew his dagger. His weapon vibrated as danger approached, which helped him immensely. Just before him appeared a new mutant, and it seemed much stronger than the previous one. The battle began, and after a while, he managed to win again. He had to kill many mutants, but even after spending some time on the island, nothing had changed. The only valuable item was a map he had managed to find. It marked a place that the demon from the tower had told him about. So ahead lay a long and dangerous journey to reach that very spot. Many monsters and dangers awaited him. Additionally, there were people on the island. One of them was a woman with red hair. The mutants obeyed her and feared her. She had found a way to tame them. Just at that moment, she was out hunting. But then something unexpected happened. The woman accidentally injured her friend. The man got angry, but promised to forgive her and not be mad that she had shot him right in the knee. Moreover, there were many other people. They were chasing the woman, but realized they had made a big mistake because she was protected by a giant rhino, and just then, it was about to attack them. Now everyone was trying to gather to protect themselves from the grotesque mutant. The main character watched what was happening and realized that the girl was much stronger than the others. But surprisingly, the people were weak. So how had they managed to escape from the tower and stay alive for so long? A fight broke out, and the Fire King intervened. He wanted to help the girl, but she injured him again. This time it wasn't an accident. She simply wanted to anger him. She wanted to help, but ended up offending the man. Now the mutants began to attack him. The battle started, and Manhwa just watched what was happening. Still, he intervened in the fight and took down one of the strongest mutants. Blood appeared on the king's face, and he couldn't understand who had managed to kill one of the strongest mutants so easily. A lot of smoke surrounded them, so he couldn't see who his savior was. But gradually the smoke began to clear, and he saw Manhwa standing before him. The king couldn't comprehend who was in front of him. The people who witnessed how easily the main character killed the mutants wanted to take his body. They were interested in the rhino's horn because it was a very valuable resource. To kill it, at least 10 people were needed. The more horns a monster had, the stronger it was. The girl looked at the main character in surprise, and she dared to approach him. She wanted to introduce herself and find out who he was and where he had gotten such incredible strength. Because no one had ever managed to kill mutants with a single blow as effortlessly as this guy did. Manhwa just looked at her in surprise and didn't respond. He learned the name of this world. It was the planet Chaos. But now he couldn't understand what that meant. The girl was so impressed that she couldn't respond and silently stared at him. She managed to learn the main character's name. She also found out that he had ended up on the planet by accident and was trying to escape from there. Moreover, he didn't know the local language. They were surprised because no one had ever come to them who was as strong as the main character. Additionally, he agreed to give them the bodies of the slain monsters and didn't claim any reward. The girl pondered his words and couldn't understand how he had become so strong, because he had killed a powerful mutant without even using magic. She tried to scan him and understand what skills he was using, but even her own powers didn't help her. She saw nothing and the check was impossible. It seemed his powers were in another system beyond their universe. Chaos was not a simple world. There were several transition points here. No one could kill mutants so easily, so she wanted to know who he really was more than anything. But Manhwa had many questions, yet he remained silent. She got angry about that. What irritated her the most was that he simply ignored all her questions and didn't respond. It seemed he didn't understand her language, but that wasn't the case. In reality, he didn't even know who he truly was or what had compelled him to participate in the trials. The entire meaning of his past was lost after he ended up in the tower. The only thing that mattered to him was his friends. But now they were all dead, and he was left alone in a new and foreign world. He had many friends who were now just memories. Among them was his love. Perhaps now his companions lived somewhere on Earth and had forgotten about him. But now he remembered nothing. Yet it seemed the girl didn't believe his words. For a moment she thought he was a god. But suddenly his weapon began to vibrate, signaling that new danger was approaching. He had to prepare, and just then a mutant appeared. She was very surprised when she saw his weapon reacting to enemies. It seemed to be a super weapon since her sword was broken. At that moment, they thought it was all about his weapon, and the boy himself wasn't as strong as they initially thought. He killed the mutant again with a single blow. It would have taken the woman a lot of time and effort to do that. She didn't like that Manhwa was trying to protect her. Realizing he wouldn't answer her questions, she decided to offer him a deal. And when Manhwa showed interest, she began to explain. Her name was Mino, and she told him about Chaos and the unit they had formed. It seemed she wanted the main character to kill the people in her unit. After all, soon they would try to kill him, so he needed to prepare for that. Night fell, so the unit decided to stop. If they kept moving in the dark, they would provoke the mutants. The group built a campfire and planned to spend the night. The main character didn't sit with them. He knew there was a settlement nearby marked on the map. Besides, he saw those strange particles floating in the air again. There were so many of them, just like he had observed in the tower. Suddenly, the king learned that the main character's level was below the threshold. It seemed Manhwa could only kill a mutant thanks to the super weapon he had. It was a special item that could be obtained in the tower by killing specific mutants. He understood that people would be terrified when they found out where he had been and how he had managed to wield that item. Moreover, the demon from the tower said that this weapon wasn't the most powerful among those he could acquire. However, he wasn't sure if this land, where he had ended up, was truly that terrible. In the middle of the night, chaos erupted. A girl tried to sneak up on him, wanting to do it as quietly as possible. They were trying to warn him that enemies were about to kill the main character and take his weapon. She wanted him to use his sword against them, but she couldn't make him agree to that. The main character didn't want to fight because he had given his sword to the strangers, who were now the Night Watch. Now his new enemy was trying to destroy him with his own weapon, and the Fire King summoned others who could help him kill the main character. Finally, he managed to find out who these people really were. Just then, the strangers began their attack. The girl had to use her own magic to protect herself and her friend. Arrows flew at them, but that wasn't the end, as a tough confrontation lay ahead. Many of the bandits got closer, so she tried to use close combat weapons. She could fend off their attacks with her bare hands. It was easy for her to take down anyone who tried to get close. Soon, the entire enemy army was wiped out. Their lifeless bodies sprawled on the ground. She was satisfied with her work, but it seemed she had overdone it, as the attackers were no more. The other survivors didn't dare approach her. Everyone quickly realized she was a real witch. They understood this when she made the monsters attack them. To gain such powerful strength, Mino had to turn to ghost warriors, and that was strictly forbidden, even for strawberries. Those who dared take that desperate step became their captives forever, unable to rid themselves of the ghosts. But everyone in the world of chaos wished for the Fire King's death because they were true villains. Mino's power didn't affect the main character. He easily stopped her attack and blocked all her strikes. Now that he realized his army would be strong, he wanted to deal with her personally and kill her. He had a special weapon he planned to use against her. Moreover, he had another plan, and the king was ready for anything. Mino understood that the enemies were strong because at that moment, they were all at level 1. Plus, there were so many of them. They began to surround Mino, coming from all sides. Now it was clear. She had overestimated herself and was in danger. She probably wouldn't have the strength to defeat such a large army that the king commanded. There were 30 or 40 enemies, and she hadn't felt that from the start. And they were all about to attack her right now, wanting to do it as quickly and brutally as possible. The main character realized he needed to intervene. Moreover, his weapon had been stolen and was about to be used against him, and he couldn't allow that. Suddenly, she saw a black fox next to her, one that everyone feared. It was a terrifying creature, nothing like a human. It had sharp teeth and a grotesque face. Moreover, the monster was incredibly strong and fast. Anyone who faced it one-on-one was sure to perish. A large number of people from different parts of the chaos world had gathered to kill the witch. Suddenly, she realized she would die, so she dared to ask the main character for help. First of all, she apologized to him, though that was not easy to do. So she gave him the Nightmare Stone and wanted him to start running, at least to save himself. In this world, this stone was used to teleport a person to the nearest castle where it was safe. She had only one, so she gave it to him to ensure he could return. At that moment, he understood that this stone didn't take you back in time. It saved a person and brought them to safety. And now he realized how wrong everyone was when they thought the stone could save them. They had lost so much because, in reality, it changed nothing. He wondered if the girl would go back in time if she had the chance. But she found his question utterly ridiculous. Of course, she wouldn't take such an opportunity. She had worked hard and studied her whole life, and she was ready to die even today and wouldn't want to return to the past for anything. Suddenly, the main character approached her. Today, he wouldn't let her die and was determined to protect the girl, even at the cost of his own life. Mino couldn't understand why he was on her side. However, Genwan charged into the attack. He began taking down his enemies one by one. Panic spread through their army, and many men fled upon seeing how strong the main character was. Those who remained couldn't believe he could defeat them all. Even in such a tough and complicated situation, the main character remained calm. Now it was time to use the spell he had received during his time in the tower. It was an incredible power that made him much stronger, and using it against ordinary people, the city would be victorious. This was the first chance to test this incredible weapon on living people. And now he knew just how effective and dangerous it was. With ease, he managed to kill everyone who stood in his way. Even the most dangerous type fell helpless against his incredible strength. When the king saw what was happening, he couldn't believe his eyes. It seemed the main character was invincible, and he quickly managed to kill all the enemies. The last one left standing was the Fire King, and he was very frightened. All his remaining army began to flee to save their lives. But the main character wasn't going to let him go so easily. He wanted the enemy to pay for what he had done. So he struck. His blow was so powerful that the bodies of the dead enemies began to scatter around. Mina was terrified, having never seen such power before. From the very beginning, she thought the main character was just an ordinary fool. But now, seeing who he truly was, she began to fear and respect him. Even without his weapon, he remained very strong, and she thanked him for saving her life. Genwan was one of those who couldn't be defeated, so she looked at him in awe, considering him a true god. After what she had seen, she had many questions for him. Now she wouldn't let him go until she found out who he really was and what his name was. But he had no answer to that question, so he just smiled. He had already given his name, so he thought she wanted to hear something else. He had learned a lot about her and knew she was a witch, and now she wanted to hear his biography. However, the boy wasn't going to share anything. He wanted to remain a mystery to her for as long as possible. She only wanted to get closer to him and learn that incredible power he possessed.